Karen, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, great city of Allentown. It's my honor to join such a august company, both with respect to the venue, but also with respect to my great colleagues. Frank Gaffney set the stage, illuminated many of the big pieces that we need to consider this morning and this afternoon. Karen, of course, gave the wonderful introduction into what the intent is. It's World War III, or as Frank says, World War Z, which I think is very important, two very important points to keep in mind, that this is indeed a war. Sam Faddis gave us a wonderful introduction, of course, to that war in the intelligence realm. And what I'd like to do is to give you some insight, some thoughts, my reflections on the war in the political realm. And to talk about, well, we are fighting a war, very much so. We've been fighting it. It was declared by the Chinese Communist Party and employed against the United States. We've been slow to recognize it. But how do we achieve victory in this war? Our enemies declared war on us, so how are we going to win it? And to do so, we need to understand the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party. And we need to understand what communism is and how it's been employed, how it motivates our enemy, how it's employed by our enemy, and why it's inherently illegitimate and a profound weakness of our enemy that can be employed and in fact used against our enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. So the current Cold War with the CCP is multifaceted. It's fought in every domain. It's fought in the diplomatic realm. It's fought in the economic realm, as Frank mentioned, in terms of our investment going into China, which is helping the CCP. It's fought in all other domains short of, thus far at least, short of the kinetic realm, right? We're not shooting at each other yet, although in fact we did do so. 36,000 Americans were killed in the Korean War. Most of those 36,000 Americans were killed by Chinese soldiers. In Vietnam, from 65 to 68, in Operation Rolling Thunder, it was widely known that the Chinese ran the logistical aspects of PAVN, of the North Vietnamese Army, but also the anti-aircraft artillery, or AAA sites that were shooting at American airmen, Marines, and naval aviators. And killed over 1,000 of those men. So we fought kinetically, but we're not fighting presently kinetically. We could at any time fight kinetically. Right now, the CCP is pressuring our treaty ally, the Philippines, at Sabina Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, elsewhere. Right now, they're pressuring a key partner, Taiwan, conducting a variety of incursions against Taiwanese air and sea space as part of an ongoing campaign to conquer that island. Japan similarly is, and also India, a key partner. So when we think about it, we need to recognize they're at war with us, and they have been since they came to power in 1949. We have recognized in the Cold War that they were at war with us. We recognized a Sino-Soviet alliance as being a great danger for the United States, and we acted accordingly. But since then, the Chinese have been the CCP has been very successful in waging political warfare against us to disarm us, or what Navy Captain James Fennell and I argue in our book, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. They succeeded in causing us to threat deflate. Right, where we didn't recognize that they were a threat, even though they were a supreme threat. They were so because they wanted to be. They wanted to conquer the United States. They wanted to supplant the United States in its dominant position in international politics. They didn't have the capabilities to do so. They had the intent, but they didn't have the power. What did Deng Xiaoping, one of the greatest strategists of the 20th century, if not the greatest strategist of the 20th century, do? He recognized that he could make the American political class, he could make Wall Street, he could make Silicon Valley his partner. He could actually get the capitalists to fund him and thus save the Chinese Communist Party. And that's genius. And he did it. he saved the Chinese Communist Party and turned it into a powerhouse, where in 1990 it's about 0.6% of world gross domestic product, and in 2019 it's almost 19% of world gross domestic product. About 1 out of every 5 things made in the world economy is made in China. Okay, so in 30 years he did that as a result of the policies that he put in place, and that was supremely successful. So the impact of that ideology has been profound. It's been profound principally in its gross deleterious effect directed against the Chinese people. The impact of the ideology of communism explains the aggressiveness of the Chinese Communist Party and why there won't be any compromise with the Chinese Communist Party. Their attitude is they're going to defeat us. They're going to win, and similarly, we must have that attitude. We're in a war. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a war. And we're going to either win or we're going to lose that war, but we need to recognize it as such. But when we understand that point, that ideology of communism, we understand what? It's a Western import. It was made by Europeans and exported to China, as well as exported to the United States, by a Soviet imperial project, right? The Chinese Communist Party is not a product of China, just as the American Communist Party is not a product of America. It was a product of Moscow. It was a product of Bolshevism and the Third International, or the Communist International, which intent was to spread deliberately the communist revolution to every state around the world, every country around the world, to undermine existing governments and replace them with communist governments. It's an imperial project. And they've had successes in their colonialism. They successfully colonized China, the CCP. They're attempting to colonize the United States equally, as well as other states around the world. That revolution ebbs and flows. Obviously, 1989 and 1991 was an ebbing of that tide, but it hasn't stopped. It's relentless. So when we recognize that it's a Western ideology, we recognize that it's an import. It has nothing in accord with the Chinese or the American political tradition, ideologies, or history. But the effect on China has been profound, and it's created a swath of destruction through that country. It's intentionally destroyed the pillars of China, of their civilization, and killed many scores of millions of Chinese. Estimates run from about 60 million Chinese killed by the Chinese Communist Party to upwards of 200 million people killed by the Chinese Communist Party. Right? That is a very effective killing machine. And they need to kill so many people because they're illegitimate, and they know they're illegitimate. So they stay in power by terror and the application of that terror. That understanding allows us 3 insights into the behavior of the People's Republic of China. First, it allows us to understand why they're inherently aggressive, as I've stressed. There's no compromise with them. They're going to bring about profound domestic changes in every state they're successfully able to colonize, as well as to employ military might, other means of warfare, the intelligence competition, the economic competition, the diplomatic contradiction, to force all societies into that Procrustean bed of Leninism, to force them all into that tyrannical straitjacket. So in addition to that requiring aggression, it also requires, if you will, political warfare, or as Karen referenced, unrestricted warfare is a topic that they often use. We could think of that more as a form or an impact of, or an aspect of political warfare. But unrestricted warfare is going to be employed against all non-communist states, including the United States, which includes the application of every means available, whether that's using our media, whether that's using our institutions against us, whether that's buying politicians, corrupting politicians, and employing them against us. All means fair and foul are going to be employed by the Chinese Communist Party. And we have to stress that they're fair and foul, right? We've transferred through legal means a lot of technology knowledge to China, right? Sam touched on the illegal means, the intelligence collections, but it's to our great, essentially, dismay when Americans should recognize that a lot has been transferred legally, and U.S. firms have done so legally. The second insight is that the CCP is, as I've stressed, a product of Soviet imperialism. The Soviets created the Chinese Communist Party in 1921 through the Communist International, and they ran it in every sense that matters. The Soviets ran the Chinese Communist Party. They ordered it, Stalin ordered it disbanded, and brought into the KMT, the Chinese nationalists, which then fled to Taiwan in 1949, and then ordered it out of the KMT. So Stalin is in control of this entity. There's very little that's China or Chineseness about, if you will, the Chinese Communist Party. There's a lot which is Bolshevik or Soviet about the Chinese Communist Party, and we need to recognize that. So the Soviets provided its foundation, its direction for what's known as Maoism, or socialism with Chinese characteristics, or most recently, Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. Right? You can keep changing the color of the cat, but it remains the same. Thirdly, and most importantly, it's illegitimate. There's nothing legitimate. The Chinese people didn't vote for it. They didn't put it in power. It seized power as a result of Soviet power. It was the Soviet Union that nurtured the Chinese Communist Party, sustained it, directed it, controlled it in the big decisions that needed to be made, and then put it in power through its aid and the Red Army and its undermining of the KMT and its undermining of the US understanding of the Chinese Civil War. So the CCP is illegitimate precisely because it was formed by the Communist International and directed by the Soviet Union. Stalin, really, and the Red Army were responsible for their success in 1949. Secondly, they're illegitimate because they've sustained the tyranny of the failed ideology of communism on the Chinese people. And that ideology should be thought of for what it is. It's an illegitimate polity for China, and it's the last surviving form of Western colonialism. The fact that China was colonized by the Soviets, right? It's the last remaining form of Western colonialism. And the CCP can't hide the fact that they're the product of Soviet imperialism. Thirdly, it's illegitimate because of its abhorrent ideology, leadership, and direction, which we see today under the misrule of communist dictator Xi Jinping. 70 years of the CCP's tyranny have led to the recognition by the Chinese people that the odious, corrupt, and illegitimate regime rules for itself. It does not rule for the people, the Chinese people, or any people governed horribly by communism. So when we understand that, we can recognize they're illegitimate, and they know they are illegitimate, and so they resort to tyrannical methods to stay in power. How do you deal with that, and how do you achieve victory against that entity? Well, by recognizing its illegitimacy and calling it out in every form. Many things can be done. I simply want to touch on 2 points. One would be to have, really, a Tokyo trials. After World War II, there were war crimes tribunals in Tokyo for the Japanese and Nuremberg, of course, more famously for the Germans. There's never been a Nuremberg trial for communism. And there's never been a trial for the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and its tyranny. So entities should support the creation, led by the Chinese diaspora, led by the Chinese people, to try the Chinese Communist Party for the crimes that they've committed in the past, and then the crimes that they've committed presently, and their aggression against other states, right? We can think of many different tranches or buckets of charges that might be brought against them, but it would be extremely valuable to try them in absentia. And when they fall, to hold their leaders accountable, justifiably so. The second thing to do about the Chinese Communist Party is to expel it from international society. There's no reason why they should participate in the UN, why we should have diplomatic relations with the Chinese Communist Party, or we should treat them as a part of international society. We didn't do that with apartheid South Africa, right? They were expelled from international society, and there's no reason why we should tolerate this Western colonial entity ruling the Chinese people. Freeing the Chinese people begins by recognizing that they'll free themselves with assistance from people of goodwill around the world, and that requires, to some degree, nations coming together to expel them. And that means bringing about some dramatic but well overdue necessary mechanisms from our treatment. Frank Gaffney mentioned, obviously, investment, right? What's the right amount of investment in communist China? 0. What's the right amount of trade with the Chinese Communist Party? 0. Right? What's the right number of students to have in the United States or in the West? Right? Far greatly reduced numbers. How many professors should we have of Tibetan studies at American universities and in Australia and New Zealand? A lot. How many professors should we have of Muslim studies, of East Turkestan studies around the world? A lot. So there are many things that we can do to underscore and to illuminate the essentially the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. How many American universities teach communism? Well, all of them do, but that's pro-communism, right? How many reveal essentially the crimes of communism? Very, very few. You can count on the fingers of one hand the numbers of institutions that do that. So when we recognize that the Chinese people have their own ideas about how to govern China based on their glorious and exalted history, we can see that being ruled by a Soviet knockoff, a Soviet colonial project, is not part of the plan, nor should it be. The Chinese people should be ruled by their own political principles as they have been in the past. And that insight introduces the fundamental tremendous vulnerability for the CCP, and that ideology remains rooted in Leninism. And moving to a better future for the Chinese people begins by recognizing, again, the CCP is illegitimate, it has no right to rule the Chinese people, and should not. So in conclusion, the US is in a new Cold War. Sino-American security competition is the great struggle of the 21st century. It's going to be, 21st century will be defined and will resolve the dispositive question, whether the 21st century is going to be a century which is defined by freedom, whether free and it's going to be protected by, freedom will be protected by the United States, or whether it's going to fall into the totalitarian abyss as sought by the Chinese Communist Party. In the 20th century, of course, we encountered the same question, the same dispositive question, and freedom triumphed over communism because freedom freedom as advanced by political liberalism is a legitimate ideology. The people have a voice in that. The people make their decisions, unlike communism. So today, the answer to the question, will freedom or tyranny define the 21st century, is going to be answered by the American people, the Chinese people, people around the world, as well as our governments. But the leadership and focus of our government, as well as of the American people, are going to contribute to ensuring that this answer will be the same in the 21st century as it was in the 20th century, and that is that freedom is going to triumph over the CCP's tyranny. Not going to be an easy task. Frank's book, The Indictment, shows how the tentacles have wrapped themselves around American political leaders, the federal level, the state level, local level, tribal, territorial level as well. Very difficult task. But Americans can do it. We defeated tyranny in the 20th century, whether that was Soviet communism or whether that was Italian fascism or Nazism or Japanese militarism. American people are able to make a contribution to that. We won't overthrow the CCP by ourselves. That's going to be done by the Chinese people, but we can help taking very substantial steps, breaking down the Great Firewall, allowing the Chinese people to communicate freely with the outside world as well as among themselves, as we do. But again, we recognize that many of the same problems that we face domestically in the United States are ones that we see in greater degree or with exaggerated effect in the People's Republic of China. But it's not beyond the capabilities of the American people who've had the blessings of liberty, who've had the best political system that they created, that they passed from generation to generation, we inherited from our ancestors, and hopefully will pass to our progeny. That remains to be seen whether that will be done in 2024, and the election of 2024, of course, is a critical one for that reason. But Americans have done it in the past, and we're able to do it again. So I thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to present some insights into the Chinese Communist Party and its implications, of course, why it's a vicious ideology, why it's a tyrannical ideology, and what can be done to hold it to account and ideally overthrow it. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.